Mercury is strong in both of his own signs of Gemini and Virgo. In Gemini, Mercury is curious and adaptable, right? Mercury also, of course, gets a lot of confidence here in his ability to communicate and also in his ability to understand social trends. And so Mercury in Gemini is a great asset in a horoscope. However, Mercury can also get a bit distracted here, right? The energy is a bit more relaxed and adaptable, so Mercury can get a bit restless and the thoughts can get scattered, and he might suffer a little bit from information overload, right? He might just forever be seeking new information, more information, but never really come to a conclusion. Mercury in Virgo in its own sign, which is in the last 10 degrees, is a lot more methodical and precise, right? In Gemini, Mercury can just enjoy, exploring new information or, checking out new social trends. In Virgo, Mercury is a lot more focused on efficiency and refining knowledge to a very high level, right? Because Mercury in Virgo has a strong attention to detail and has also a great ability to organize information that is complex into something useful and structured. In its own sign, Mercury's energy here is still not pure and raw, and that can manifest for Mercury in Virgo by becoming overly perfectionistic and perhaps getting overly obsessed over minor details and then losing sight of the bigger picture. Mercury is in its Mula Trikona dignity in Virgo from 15 to 20 degrees, and this is when it has full control over its intellect, right? This is where it is a master of critical thinking, right? It is highly structured, clear, and able to deliver precise results. And in Mula Trikona dignity, Mercury really represents the ideal use of the intellect, where it can be analytical, practical, and efficient, but without being subjected to the distractions of, Gemini's scattered energy or Virgo's, overly critical nature. Mercury here is really in its raw form, and in that raw form, there's really no room for over-perfectionism or intellectual doubt, right? And so Mercury in Mula Trikona dignity is really fully focused. It is operating from a pure intellect and able to perfectly understand and manage all aspects of a given situation. And then there's exaltation. When we think that it can't get any better, there's still room for improvement. And especially Mars's exaltation is quite unique. Mercury is the only planet that is exalted in its own sign, and this is no coincidence. All the other planets require an external environment to maximize their potential, but Mercury himself is the planet of adaptability and pure intelligence, and it is Virgo that really represents those qualities in their highest expression. And so let's try and understand this a little bit more. Planets usually have their natural biases. So for example, the Sun rules authority, Mars is aggressive, Venus acts out of love. And so planets usually need other signs to balance them out. So the Sun's tendency towards leadership needs Aries for action, right? Mars's impulsiveness needs the structure and discipline of Capricorn, and Venus's need for love becomes really perfect in Pisces, because there it can experience the complete spiritual love. Now Mercury, however, is different in that regard, because he is inherently neutral and he doesn't have a bias or an agenda, right? His sole function is to analyze something to process information as efficiently as possible and then communicate what he thinks clearly and reasonably. And so Mercury can do that perfectly in its exaltation sign of Virgo, right? There are no distractions. It's a pure and also stable environment where his analysis, his logic, and his precision can thrive perfectly. And so it is in those first 15 degrees of Virgo where Mercury's efficiency and performance reaches the maximum level. Jupiter is in its own sign in Sagittarius from 10 to 30 degrees, and this is where he becomes very wise and learned. But his approach to knowledge here is more adaptable and interactive. Instead of representing a philosophy or a branch of knowledge purely, Jupiter here is able to engage with the world more, and he is able to integrate different perspectives, right? This is where he becomes the open-minded traveler who embraces adventure so that he can learn more about himself, about the world, and thereby expand its wisdom in a more diverse way. And so when Jupiter is in its own sign, in Sagittarius, then he doesn't really depend on a very strict framework of knowledge. Right? He can relax more and allow for his ideas to evolve. Now, he still functions at a very high level when it comes to knowledge and wisdom, but he's just a lot more open-minded. When Jupiter is in Pisces, there's a shift away from Jupiter's structured approach to wisdom to a more introspective and mystical approach to wisdom. Faith and intuition really take priority in Pisces over the philosophical principles of Sagittarius. Right? Pisces doesn't seek the truth through some structured learning or debate. Right? In fact, in Pisces, all boundaries get dissolved, and the focus is on universal and intuitive wisdom. Right? Jupiter in Pisces doesn't need to analyze the truth because it can feel it. And so Pisces is really guided by intuition, which is a deep emotional intelligence compared to the structured philosophical understanding of Sagittarius. Now, the energy for Jupiter in Pisces is still a bit relaxed and comfortable, and so Jupiter in Pisces can tend to become too idealistic and also drift into abstract spirituality without really any clear direction or even commitment. But overall, we can say that Jupiter in Pisces is like the mystic or the devotee, whereas Jupiter in Sagittarius is more like the spiritual teacher or philosopher who prefers an intellectual debate over trusting his intuition. In its Mulla Trikona dignity in Sagittarius, in the first 10 degrees of Sagittarius, this is where Jupiter functions in its most pure and effective manner. This is where Jupiter becomes the true teacher and is able to spread wisdom in a pure way. In its own sign, Jupiter is a lot more speculative and sort of blending different perspectives. But in Mulla Trikona, this is where Jupiter has pure knowledge and is able to present it in a way that is the most meaningful, right? This is when the Guru becomes a living example of his teachings, where he has the discipline and full control over his wisdom. Jupiter in Mulla Trikona dignity is really a master at creating systems of learning, and those can be academic or spiritual. Right? He can structure them, organize them, and then also share them like no one else. So Jupiter, he really becomes the most qualified university professor, or if he's more spiritually inclined, then his ability to structure and spread wisdom is done in the most pure and meaningful way. And that's also why he is here the most qualified spiritual teacher, because he ensures that wisdom is not just an abstract concept, but he himself becomes a living example of how ancient knowledge leads to self-realization. And then there's Jupiter in Cancer. The sign of Cancer is what allows Jupiter to maximize its potential. In Cancer, this is where Jupiter's wisdom becomes the most effective because it gets connected to the heart. Right? Jupiter here is not just a thinker, a philosopher, or even a teacher. He becomes a nurturer, a protector, and a mentor who ensures that the wisdom is actually personally meaningful, which means it can actually uplift people's hearts. Now, Sagittarius can be overly theoretical. Pisces can become overly abstract, but Jupiter in Cancer is able to apply knowledge in a way that it is deeply emotionally impactful. Right? In Cancer, Jupiter understands that true wisdom is not just about knowing philosophical concepts, but about guiding people in a way that resonates with their hearts. And so it is Cancer that really transforms Jupiter from a philosopher into a compassionate leader, one who is able to ensure that teachings are not just intellectually understood, but also deeply felt and applied in everyday life.